Hi, this is Tony Lobianco, the director of the Kentucky Post-School Outcomes Center, and I'm going to talk to you today about the yo-yo and give you information that will allow you to access the system and provide us with some good data about our former students. Congratulations on being selected as a new interviewer by your DOS. I think that says that they have a lot of respect for you and what you do, because it's something that I think most of us take very seriously, and hopefully it will also allow you to be part of a larger conversation about transition experiences for young people and how to improve them. We're going to talk about today on this webinar why we collect post-school outcome data, how we do it through the yo-yo. We'll talk about what your roles and responsibilities are as an interviewer. We'll talk about how to contact former students. We'll have interviewing 101, skills that'll help you be the best interviewer that you can be. We'll talk about how to direct people that you're talking to resources that might be helpful to them. And then I will show you the system, the yo-yo instrument itself, how to access it, and some other features of our website that you will find useful as you go about doing this. So let's talk about why we collect post-school outcome data first. So there are several reasons, but the first reason is that it is a federal requirement. The Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, of the U.S. Department of Education requires that all states report the percentage of youth who are no longer in secondary school, had IEPs in effect at the time they left school, and were doing one of several things. Were they enrolled in higher education? Were they competitively employed? Or were they enrolled in some other type of education or employed in a non-competitive manner? And those are broken down into 14A, B, and C. So the federal government requires states to do it, and the state of Kentucky also, in turn, makes it a requirement. And I am very happy that they make it such a high priority. The Kentucky Department of Education wants to help districts improve transition outcomes, and they contract with us to help them in that regard. We develop the instrument, we collect secondary data. You guys are the primary collectors of data. We analyze that data and we report out to the federal government to meet their requirement. We report to the state, we report to districts, regions, we'll report to your school if you want us to. We'll talk to anybody that'll allow us to talk to them about what we find, keeping student information confidential, of course, at the individual level. But KDE also wants to know about additional items other than just what the federal government requires, and I think this is a really good decision by them and by our advisory group to ask questions about a young person's residence. Where are they living after they exit high school? Their support services, what kinds of support are they getting? What kinds of support is out there but they may not be getting? What went well in high school? What helped them transition to adult life? How engaged are they in their community? So a bunch of extra questions that go beyond the federal requirement, but are ultimately aimed at helping schools and districts know how to prepare young people with IEPs for adult life. The most important reason, I think, to collect post-school outcome data is that it's going to help districts and educators make informed decisions. That's why I think we all got into this field, not because we wanted to fulfill federal or state requirements, but because we wanted to help young people have successful adult lives. That's what we do, I hope. To that end, like I said, we make reports available. DOSes have access to those reports through our system. Our staff is willing and able to meet with your school, with your district, with your cooperative region to talk to you about your yo-yo data, what's been found, and how you can use it to make improvements in transition services. Every co-op throughout the state, all 9 co-ops have a transition consultant that would be able to work with you as well. We work closely with them. When you're interviewing young people or possibly their family members, you will have an opportunity to access resources to help them, to share those resources with them so that they're not just being interviewed, they could actually be helped directly through the interview process. And you're going to get firsthand knowledge, firsthand stories from the people that you talk to. I think that's probably one of the coolest things about being a yo-yo interviewer, is to reconnect with your own former students that you may not have seen for about a year and find out what they're doing with their life, and then use that information to plan for the next round or rounds of former students that are going to come through so that they might learn from the experiences of the people that you talk to, and you can help them transition more smoothly into adult life. Let's talk about how we collect post-school outcome data, the mechanics behind it. So we do it through the YOYO, which is not just a fancy acronym. It stands for the Youth 1 Year Out Former Student Interview. And it's an online interview that has about 30 questions. But I say about 30 questions because you're not going to ask every single question to every single student. Some questions will come up for people that say that they're employed. There'll be follow-up questions about their employment experience, or if they're not employed, there'll be follow-up questions about why they're not employed. Some questions will be asked of students that dropped out about why they dropped out and what might have helped them stay in school. The system tells you who to contact. I think that's important to realize. And it's probably the first thing you'll realize when you log into the system. When we started doing this about 10 years ago, what we did was we basically said, find the former students that exited with an IEP a year ago and try to contact them and ask them these questions. And there was huge confusion all over the place because people weren't sure which students they were supposed to contact, and it seems like an easy definition, but there's a lot of nuances there. And so what we did was we worked with the Kentucky Department of Education and said, why don't you give us the list and we will tell the districts who they need to contact. So they will show up right there for you. Your dose will either assign you full district access or they will assign you access to one particular school, and you will see all the former students from either the whole district or that particular school. The YOYO tells you how to contact them, and usually I say, we'll talk about contact information. We use the best information that we have, and that doesn't mean that it's great, but I'll talk about that in a few other slides. The YOYO tells you what questions to ask them. We tried to put it in as much of a conversational tone as possible so that it could be like you're just having a conversation with a former student. Sometimes you will need to paraphrase, to rephrase, to redirect, to probe, to do all those kinds of things that interviewers need to do to get the questions out there in a way that former students can answer them in the best way possible. But it tells you what to ask. And it talks about how to provide support to former students or their parents when that is needed. So who should be interviewed, or another way of saying that is who is our population? And it is any student that exited in the 2015 school year. They had to have an IEP into place at the time of exit, and they had to have exited by either graduation with a regular or alternative diploma, by reaching maximum age, or by dropping out. Like I said, we work with KDE to identify who these former students are, assign them to the correct district, and to try to get the best contact information possible. Now, one of the main reasons that former students can't be contacted is because we don't have the right contact information. And the only way that we get the contact information is from KDE, and they get their contact information from the districts. So this is kind of my plea to you to say, please make sure before a student exits school that you have their contact information up to date. Sometimes I think a lot of times what happens is a student will enter at kindergarten or first grade or something like that. They'll get their contact information logged into the system, and there it will stay until they exit high school. And it may not change as it needs to. So when you don't have the right contact information, that's not something that we can frequently deal with. I mean, we do the best we can to make sure we have the KDE's best information, but it's still all coming from the district. Be aware that that's the reason for any inaccuracies in contact information. Now, you may have other access to information that for some reason didn't get to KDE and then didn't get to us. You may be in a small community where you know how to get a hold of someone, and that's fine. You may just have other records at your disposal, and that's fine too. Any way that you can contact a former student is okay with me. Sometimes things don't work. I talked about the contact information, but there are sometimes discrepancies in who really should be in the YOYO. Probably the most frequent is when you see a student and you say, wait a minute, that student came back to school. They exited in the 2015-16 school year. Maybe they dropped out, maybe they received an alternate diploma, but then they came back. And you say, well, they probably shouldn't be involved in a 1 year out survey because they're still in school. And you would be right. Sometimes it happens that a student moves to another district. They say that they're going to enroll there, but they never do enroll there. You wouldn't have any way of knowing that, but the other district would say, well, no, there were never a student here. And then what it ends up having to happen is they need to be considered a dropout from your district. That's a different definition of dropout than is used for other indicators. But in terms of the yo-yo, if you were the last district that they were at, then you're the one that they exited from. Sometimes students who should be on your list should not be for whatever reason. And you can have me add those students. I'd be happy to do that. And as I said, sometimes contact information is not up to date. And you as part of the team can help make that better every year. What do you do? And I'll show you on our website how to do this when I get to that point of the webinar. But if you want to add students, basically my policy is if you want to add somebody, I'll add them. As long as they're not already in the database like under another district or something. But if you go online to KIPSO.org, look under resources, there is a Excel spreadsheet there that you can download. It's called Copy of Fields to Add Students. Download that, fill out all the information, and upload it to our secure site on KIPSO.org. You can list a whole bunch of students, and I'll just add them all. If you want to remove a student from the yo-yo, that's a little trickier just because, being under contract with KDE, I need to make sure that we are doing our job as diligently as possible and not just deleting people without having a really good reason to do so. So you will need to provide some kind of documentation that they don't belong in the yo-yo to me. And like I said, the main reason that usually ends up being the case is because they came back to school after they exited. And the easiest way to document that that's the case is go into Infinite Campus, pull up their enrollment tab, take a screenshot of it, make sure it's got their student ID number and their name, and that they are currently enrolled, or at least were enrolled after the 15-16 school year. So, the window for the yo-yo is April 1st through June 30th, so school may be out for this year, but even if they were enrolled in the 16-17 year, that's good enough. They shouldn't be in this yo-yo. They should be in next year's yo-yo. So take that screenshot, upload it at our secure site. I'll show you where that is. Don't send me an email because that includes personal information that we want to keep private, and it's easier to get picked off in an email than it is at a secure server. So upload it there, KIPSO.org, and in all cases, KIPSO will be the ones to make the final decision as to who can be added or removed. Like I said, I'm not too stringent on the adding part, but as far as removing, sometimes we have to make tough decisions. And sometimes I catch a lot of flack from districts for making those decisions. And a lot of times it'll work easier the sooner I know about it, because sometimes it's a matter of what district a student should be in. And, and it's really like a 50-50 call sometime, whether they should be in District A or District B. Well, if District B already has all of their yo-yos done, and it's the middle of June and District A is calling me and saying they really ought to be in District B, well, I'm not going to assign them to District B. They've already done their yo-yos. They've left for the summer. They've been told they've completed all their requirements. I can't very well add a new student to them at that point. So I may just end up having to stick them with you. That's kind of a blunt way of saying it, but that's what happens a lot of times. So the sooner you go through your list of students and identify any problems with that list, the sooner I can address it, and the better it will be for everybody. And as soon as you have an account, you will be able to, well, I shouldn't say as soon as you have an account, as soon as you're officially an interviewer, you can go through and do that. And I would recommend you might want to have your dose along. You might want to have an Infinite Campus person with you when you go through that, just to make sure that everybody's records are lining up correctly. I would hope I don't get like a ton of emails saying, well, I think this student ought to be deleted. Do a little research first, because we're dealing with a population of about 4,500 students here, so I don't have time to go through every single one of them and make a determination, but you will hopefully know who should not be in your list of students to interview. Let's talk about your roles and responsibilities as being an interviewer. It's a big responsibility. Like I said, your doses have thought highly enough of you and wanted you in this role. So we should be a little proud of that, I hope. You're collecting data that's going to tell us about post-school outcomes of former students with disabilities all across Kentucky, and we're going to use it. I know there's people on the call that have listened to me report to all kinds of groups, to the state, to the federal government, to individual districts, to sometimes to other agencies, to Voc Rehab, to behavioral and intellectual developmental disability groups, to parent groups. A lot of people are interested in the data that we have, and they use it for really good purposes. That being said, of course, we do not identify who individual students are, so I'm not sending out reports about what Johnny did. I'm sending out reports about what groups of students did. That's an important distinction to make. Like I said, there's important decisions that are going to be based on these reports that you're collecting. And the big question of why we collect post-school outcome data we talked about. But if a young person that you're interviewing or trying to convince to be interviewed wants to know why they're doing it, you can tell them that you're using their experiences to try to help future students be more successful. And I think that can be pretty compelling to someone to hear that their experiences are valued, both because you value them as a person, but you really want to make the system better for other people as well. And talking to them, and the more that they're willing to share, is a way to do that. And remember also, in talking about a big responsibility, you may be the actual final person, the last person from the school system that ever speaks with this former student again. You might be the only person for the past year that has, and you might be the last impression that your district ever makes. So it's important to show them that you care about how they're doing, what's happening to them, and let them know that their experiences are very valuable to you. Confidentiality. Make sure that you know that all their personal information is kept confidential, and make sure that it is actually kept confidential. There's a lot of ways that this can go wrong. Like I said, if you email me, that's jeopardizing their confidentiality. You can email me anytime, but if you email me and say, I'm not sure what to do about John Smith, he dropped out of school, emails can get hacked, things can get compromised that way, and all of a sudden, people that thought they knew John Smith and didn't know that he had a learning disability, all of a sudden they know that. Also, you can have, you leave your computer on when you go to lunch. You've got a list of students there. Another student walks into your office and goes, hey, I didn't know Bill had a emotional behavioral disorder or disability. All of a sudden I know that about him. I'm gonna exploit that for some reason. That's not good. Don't leave yo-yo materials in a public place. Don't allow unauthorized persons to look at them. Don't talk about who you interviewed or what they say. Don't go home to your friends and family at night as you're going out to dinner and saying, man, did you know that this guy that we really thought he was doing well in school, and turns out he can't hold a job to save his life. That would be a big breach of their confidentiality. And if you find out that you've made a mistake, let your supervisor know, and we'll try to do everything we can to minimize the amount of damage that could happen from that. Contacting former students. Response rates. Let's talk about that. Usually we have about a 60% response rate. Every interview is going to end in one of four different ways. You will make contact and complete an interview. Like I said, that's about 60% of the time. You'll make contact, but they will refuse to be interviewed. That happens about 4% of the time. That's within their right. If they don't want to be interviewed, they don't have to be interviewed. As an interviewer, you have to try to interview them, but they can say no. They can hang up the phone. They can do whatever they want. It's a voluntary process on their end. You won't be able to make contact is the third possible way that an interview could go, and that happens about 35% of the time. Like I said, that's frequently because of inaccurate contact information. Sometimes it's just because a young person doesn't want to be contacted, and I can understand that. I don't know that, usually when my phone rings, I look at the caller ID, and if it's not someone I really want to talk to, I just don't answer the phone. Then after they call 4 or 5 times, I might call out them, or, I might pick up the phone and just hang it up or something. And a young person may do that, and there's really not a whole lot we can do about that. That is one of the reasons that we've asked the school systems to do these interviews, because I think there's a better chance that they'll be able to make contact. And if we contracted out to the Survey Research Center or some anonymous group that they wouldn't know, hopefully former students will be a little more likely to want to talk to someone, and particularly a former teacher that maybe they had a good relationship with. The final way that an interview can end is really the worst way, and that's if you don't even make an attempt to conduct an interview. That happens about 1% of the time. And those are things, as I said, we're a contractor for KDE, and they want to know they want to know the outcomes for sure, but they also want to know what districts aren't even really trying to do these interviews. And then I have to report that to them. There's occasionally docers will ask me as well, they'll say, so who's doing these interviews, and do you really think that they're trying their best? Because I had a few years ago a district came to me and I asked if I would present data about their yo-yo, and I said, well, ordinarily I'd be happy to, but there's not really much I can say about your district. And they said, well, why not? We had a bunch of students, and we had interviewers, and I said, well, yeah, but you had a response rate of about 3%. And they said, well, we had a response rate of 3%. What's the rate for the state? And I said, well, for the state it's 60%. They said, well, why is ours only 3%? And I looked through and I said, well, they all said that they attempted to conduct an interview, but I can also tell you that none of them were open until the last 2 days of the interviewing window. There was nothing written on any of the interviews, and they all just said that they couldn't be contacted. So my guess is, they freaked out at the end, realized that they couldn't get all these interviews done. They tried to contact a few students, and maybe they got a few interviews. I mean, they did have a response rate of 3%, so they interviewed somebody. But they just started clicking could not contact. That's a nice way to try to cheat the system, but it doesn't really fool that many people. It's a reminder to start early, and I'm not out on a witch hunt trying to find people that are trying to act like they've done things that they haven't done. But do start early. I understand that students can't be contacted sometimes. I think everybody understands that. But when you have a really low response rate, it's pretty evident that you're not as committed to this as I think you should be. So each of the rates is reported to the state. We understand not all former students can be contacted, but there are ways to increase response rates. We'll talk about those. And there's really no excuse for not at least making a good attempt. Can I interview a family member? Well, yeah. And in fact, about a third of our interviews usually are done with family members. We want you to try to get in touch with the former student, but if they, for some reason, can't be got in touch with, if they're not there, or if they say they want a family member to answer their questions for them, go ahead and do that. But remember, it's the former students' answers that we want, not the parents. If you were to interview my parents about what they thought my life was like when I was 19, I am sure that they would give very different answers than I would. However, they might be able to guess what I would say my answers to my life were. So try to stress that really they're just standing in as a proxy of how their son or daughter would answer these questions. That can be a fine line, but do your best in that regard. Contacting former students, I talked about this a lot already. We supply the information that KDE gives us, and they get it from you. If you have a better method of contacting them, by all means do. They don't have to respond, but you have to try and start early. A good way to start early is to let them know that you're going to be contacting them. You can send out a letter. We have a draft of a letter on our website. Letting them know that you're going to be contacting them. We recommend sending it about 2 weeks before you start doing interviews. And it's a generic letter. You can download it on our website under the resources section. Personalize it if you want. Use your contact information to send it to them. The contact information we have on the yo-yo is just phone numbers and email addresses, but you should have information for their home address to send it to them. And this is one of the ways that really does increase response rates. And be prepared to do the interview. Don't just rush in and try to get one done. Make sure that you have a computer with internet access. A telephone with a speakerphone or a headset is probably the best. So allow yourself time to do the interview, about 15 minutes. is what we recommend. Try to be in a quiet area behind a closed door so you're not broadcasting your interview to the entire school system or to your family and friends. You might want to post a sign on the door says telephone interviews are in progress so you don't get disturbed. Know who you're calling. Try to remember something about the former student. We give some information about them on the yo-yo, so you'll probably remember if they have communication needs or something like that, and think ahead of time about how the best way to talk to them is, and the more personable you are with them, the more likely they are to want to talk to you. What if you just can't get in touch with someone? Well, if you've exhausted all the options that you can, or tried at least 3 phone calls, eventually you're just going to have to mark could not contact and submit the interview. Do not ever complete the interview according to just how you think they would answer. We've heard some people that have done this. They say, well, I knew Joe pretty well. I know what's going on. I can get the interview done just by going through and answering the questions for him. No, we don't want you to do that. That really gets into some validity and reliability issues with the yo-yo. You may be right, but we need to make sure that we stick to the protocol and don't complete the interview on a former student's behalf. You don't have to do it over the phone if you don't want to. You can get with the former student as long as you have internet access. They could come to the school. You could meet at a Starbucks, whatever. We've heard of someone that texted every single question back and forth to the former student because that was the best way to communicate with that former student, and it worked for them. It sounded like a lot of work to me, and I really commend the interviewer for being that creative and diligent in doing that. But if you have a method that you find works really well, share it with us, and we'll tell others. To the best that you can, try calling during the evening and on weekends. Different school systems have different ways of reimbursing you for your time. I know some that do a really good job of it, and they have pretty good response rates. I also know that there are fiscal responsibilities of schools, so not every school is maybe able to do that. But as an interviewer, talk with your DOS, talk with your principal, let them know how important this is, and ask them if there's a way that you can have some time on the evening or weekends, because that's the most likely time when you're going to get a hold of someone. And I always think it's kind of ridiculous when people call my house in the middle of the day for business reasons because, obviously I'm not going to be there. Be creative but not invasive. We don't want to badger a former student to try to get this information out of them, but we would like to get the information. So any way you can be creative to do that, we appreciate. Here's a little script you can use if you get a voicemail or an answering machine. I'm not going to read it to you, but we will. I think we actually do already have this PowerPoint on the website, so that happens sometimes, and know what to say ahead of time. How might you encourage participation? Well, you can remind them that the survey is voluntary for them. Again, not for you, but for them it is. Every question is voluntary. If they don't want to answer a particular question for whatever reason, that's fine. Skip it and move on. Let them know how important it is to their school and the district and the state. Let them know that their information is confidential, it's protected, it's private. Their name's not going to appear on any report, and that the responses are going to be combined with a lot of other students' responses. So there's no way that they will be able to be identified. It won't affect their benefits. Sometimes students worry like, oh no, are you calling because you're going to try to get me kicked off of SSI, or am I going to lose some type of benefit if I say that I'm working more than 20 hours a week? No, we don't report any of this information to those services. Even when reports do reach those offices, it's never down to the individual level. We'll only say aggregate findings. And let the former student know that they can have someone help them answer any part or all of the interview if they want. If they want to have a family member present, that's fine. Some interviewing skills that you might use. Well, this is more, I guess, just being a decent person skill, but be sensitive and listen. For some former students might become upset during the survey. It's true for parents as well. You're going to be asking about important aspects of their life. You're going to be asking them if they're working, and maybe they've wanted to work. Maybe they worked and lost their job or something like that, and that may come out during the interview. They might become very upset to have to talk about some of those things. It's understandable. It doesn't happen a whole lot, but it might be necessary to stop the interview, talk with them, reassure them that it's okay, give them some advice, perhaps. If all else fails, you can say, well, we just don't have to talk about this. It's not that important. We're not trying to cause emotional trauma in order to get our data. And remember that it's very true for parents as well, and possibly even more true for parents that their son or daughter they've had high hopes for, and things may not have worked out. Rephrasing questions. Like I said earlier, the yo-yo tells you what questions to ask, and we have tried to word these all in a way that we think is conversational and helps things go along, but they may not be the way you would ask a question. So feel free to rephrase certain things. And you may have to rephrase questions because students don't understand exactly what you're asking. Make sure you do so in a neutral way. When I say a neutral way, I put an example here. You say, from the time you left high school, have you ever had a paying job? The former student says, what do you mean? If you say, well, you never worked, did you? That's not neutral rephrasing. That's leading the witness and leading the interviewer. A better way to say that would be, do you go to work? And do they pay you there? Did you ever go to work in the past year? Ask those kinds of questions that put it a little more in their language and help them understand what it is that you're asking. Redirecting. A lot of times we've noticed that former students give answers that just aren't really relevant to what's being asked. A lot of times former students aren't real forthcoming, and a lot of times they want to talk about what they want to talk about regardless of what question you're asking them. So, be aware that might happen. You might say something like, well, I'd like to talk more about that later, but can we work on this other question first? And there's time at the end of the interview for them to say whatever they want to say, and you can write it down to the extent that you think it's relevant. If they're still not responding to the question that's asked, you enter those comments at the end of the interview, or other responses if they're not answering those exact questions. Probes. There's a lot of different types of probes. A lot of times, like I said, it's difficult to get a former student to really explain the point that they're trying to get across, and that's not just difficult for the interview, it's difficult to capture that data. It doesn't encourage the former student to really explore everything that's going on that might be pertinent, again, to helping improve transition outcomes for others. So we recommend using probes to get at this. We've restricted the yo-yo a little bit more. I know most of you are first-time interviewers, but we used to allow for a lot of other please specify kinds of questions, and we've taken a lot of those away. Really, if people probed a little bit, they probably would have gotten a response option that was already there. So rather than kind of giving an ambiguous text response, probe a little bit into what they're saying, and you'll probably find that the answer that they're giving is something that we've listed right there in the interview. On the other side, there are purely text questions where you'll be writing in text answers and trying to be as thorough about that as possible. I mean, the reason we put them there as text responses is because we want people to expound upon what they're saying. I'll give some examples of that in the next few slides. Some general probes that can be used for any question are things like, well, what did you mean by that? Or please tell me a little bit more about what you just said. Some specific probes. When we talk about agencies and people, remember that we don't know what every agency is in the state, particularly when you use abbreviations. Please try not to do that. You can use OVR. We all know what OVR means, but sometimes we get text responses, and our person that does our qualitative analysis will come over to me and say, well, what does KYWILC stand for? This person says that they go to that agency. I don't have any idea. I assume the KY is Kentucky, but who knows? So that doesn't do us a whole lot of good to have just an abbreviation. Please list out the name of the agency, and also tell us what the agency does. I mean, what it's providing. A lot of agencies provide a lot of types of different services, and that's usually what we're asking. We're not just asking, how many people went to bluegrass.org. We'd like to know, well, when they went there, did they get employment services? Did they get pre-employment services? Did they get some type of help with paying for books or transportation? Those kinds of questions are really what we're getting at there. So to probe a little bit more deeply, rather than just putting down the acronym of an agency that we can't figure out what it is anyway, tell us what they're providing. And for people, don't use names. I don't know who Mr. Smith is. I know he went to Washington, but that's about it. Oh yeah, I've got you muted. I can't hear you laugh. I'm sure that was a great one though. tell us what they do. You know, instead of putting Mr. Smith, put the football coach was really helpful, and then tell us what they did that was helpful or unhelpful. We have the question, what was the most helpful thing during high school? And a lot of times people will just put something like that. But tell us what they did. A lot of times a former student will say something like, well, they really supported me. Okay, well, that's great. I hope everybody supports you. But, in what way did they support you? Were they the person that first said to you, maybe you ought to think about looking at this welding program, and you never thought about welding before? So, that was helpful. Or, maybe what you ought to do is apply for financial aid. So, oh, okay, that really tells us something useful, that students that are getting that kind of support are having better outcomes than those other students that aren't. So that's the kind of probe that really gets us more information about that, and it's really useful. Probes about activities. We have a question that asks, what do you do on most days? And one of the biggest responses that young people give is, well, I stay at home. And a lot of people just write, stay at home. Well, ask them a little bit more about that. How do they spend their time at home? Are they just sitting around watching TV? Are they spending a lot of time with their family? Are they doing chores at home? Is there a hobby they're working on? Maybe they're actually employed from their home. Or are they really disengaging from society? Are they not wanting to do anything with anybody else? Are they just killing time? Mom and dad don't know what to do with them, so now they're out of school and they're just lounging around the house. What is it that they're doing? Another question, what are the reasons for not working or pursuing post-secondary education? A lot of times people will say that they have children. And I always think that's an interesting response that we'd like to know a little bit more about. Is it the fact that they're being a stay-at-home parent that's keeping them from working, or do they not have access to child? But yeah, follow up with them about that and see a little bit more about that experience. Another probe that we didn't list here, but a lot of times people will say disabled. They'll just say something like that. And that's really a curious response to me, because we know that a lot of people with disabilities do work and do go on to school. And I mean, that's one of the whole purposes of doing this interview. So if they do say something like that, probe a little bit more deeply. I mean, what is it about your disability that you think is preventing you from working or from going to school? Maybe it's not so much their chronic disability. Maybe it's something specific. Maybe they threw their back out and they have to take some time off from work. But maybe they just think that there's nothing out there for them because of their disability. And I wouldn't just yell at them, no, you're wrong. I mean, be sensitive to them, but ask them why they think that's the case. And then you can let them know that there are other people out there that are with similar disabilities that are going on to work, going on to higher education. I mean, our entire population is students with IEPs, and about 20% of them go on to higher education. That's a 2 or 4 year university. And even people with very significant disabilities, people with FMD labels, students that have been on the alternate assessment. Not a lot of them go on to higher education, but more than zero do. There are some that actually do. And I think those are great success stories. And I always hate it when someone says, well, he didn't go on to college because, his disability just wouldn't let him. Well, there's people with the same disability that probably are going on to some type of higher education. Maybe not at the same rate, maybe pretty low. It might be a rare event. Like I said, even the person that you're talking to, I mean, the main reason we're doing this is to help help future former students do well in their transition experiences. But for the former student that you're talking to, we have a resource guide that's available. It's online. You can access it directly from the Yo-Yo. And there are links available at the top of all the pages of the Yo-Yo to the most pertinent areas of the resource guide. So I will show that to you just a little bit more when we get to it, but it's a good resource guide to know about whether you're doing the Yo-Yo or not. There's a lot of good information in there. So I would keep that open while you're doing a Yo-Yo and be able to refer to it. How is that linked to the Yo-Yo? Like I already said, at the top of each page, there's a link to the most appropriate part of the resource guide, resource manual. Have it open when interviewing. You'll have to turn off your pop-up blocker so it can pop up. You can even send links to the interviewees. If you're talking to them, you can say, hey, you want to know more about this program, I can email it to you if you give me your email address. We also have a supplemental Yo-Yo resource manual that you might look at under resources. Judy put that together for us. It has a lot more kind of local community stuff that didn't make it into the full resource manual. And of course, there's lots of other resources on our resource page. There's transition-related videos that are great to look at. They're good for your own information, and you can always share those with former students and their families as well. Documenting what kind of resources you shared. At the end of the interview, you can note which, if any, of the resources you referred the respondent to. I always say that the transition consultant is kind of the go-to person. I know there's one of them on the line now, and I know he's the kind of guy that would do a great job if someone referred a former student to that person. So their name and contact information is going to appear at the end of the yo-yo. It'll be specific to your cooperative region. And yo-yo interviewers have a really diverse set of experiences. I mean, some of you are the experts in your field, and you know exactly who to refer young people to, and some of you probably don't. So if you're one of the people that don't, I would default to the transition consultant, but a lot of people refer people to Voc Rehab as well, to Medicare, Medicaid, the Michelle P. waiver. The other options we've listed there are information related to employment, which would include supported employment, information related to higher education, and even your personal information. I'm not saying you have to give out your name and number to everybody, but we've heard some interviewers do that. I think that's pretty cool when they've developed that kind of relationship, that they're willing to say, hey, you can give me a call if you need anything down the road, and we encourage you to do that. Like I say, I'm not saying that that's a requirement in any way, shape, or form, but it's available for you to do. And if you do, we'd like to know about it. I'm going to share my screen. All right, it should be loading. So I opened up the KIPSO.org page. If you've seen it before, it probably looks different now than it used to. Judy did a great job in the past year of modernizing our website, I guess you could say. So it is a little more fancy and up to date, I think. The first thing I want to show you is, remember when I talked about the secure site where you can upload information to me about students that need to be added or removed from the yo-yo list? Let's scroll down a little bit here. See where it says send data to KIPSO using our secure link. Click here. That's where you do that. It takes you to what is basically a Qualtrics survey and allows you to upload a document. So you can upload that Excel spreadsheet. You can upload an Infinite Campus screenshot, those kinds of things. If you just want to ask a question that doesn't have anybody's name or personal information, just send me an email or Judy. But if you need to send something securely, you can do that there. Okay, I'm going to go to resources. There's a few things I wanted to show you there. The example of the letter to send to former students, right there at the top. It's a Word document. You can download it, edit it however you want, and send it on. There's a copy of fields to add students. Like I say, it's an Excel spreadsheet. So feel free to fill that out, save it to your computer, and then upload it at our secure site. You can see here there's all kinds of information available. There's our supplemental yo-yo resource manual right there as a PDF document, and videos that I talked about down below. All right, let's show you the actual yo-yo. So to get to that, go over to data collection. All right, and actually before we get into the yo-yo, I want to clarify what you will need to do to officially become a yo-yo interviewer, and that will be to register for an account. So you can see on the left side there, it says click here to register for your account. You can use whatever username you want. You can use whatever password you want. You can reset your password if you forget it. If you forget your username, we have access to that. We don't have access to your passwords. You'll set that up. The second thing that needs to happen is you'll need to pass a quiz. Once you've got that account created, you will see a link that says take the quiz. Take the quiz. That's the second step. And then the third step, it doesn't matter which happens second or third, but your DOS needs to let us know that they want you to be an interviewer. So they can just send an email to myself or Judy and say, I want Pam Smith to be an interviewer for such and such a county, such and such a district, and then we will set them up so that their account is associated with that district and can see the students that they want them to have access to. So I am going to log into my account. And once I do, it takes me to a page that looks something like this. One of the first things you'll notice is that we have all of last year's information up here. Now this is, my account has been created for a fake district, so it doesn't have actual district information, but it has targets for the state for 14A, 14B, and 14C. It has the actual Kentucky data, so like I said, statewide 18% was the score for 14A. That means 18% of our young people went on to a 2 or 4 year college or university. And then 14B includes that as well as competitive employment. 14C includes other types of employment as well as other types of education. Then you'll see below that when you do this, your cooperative region and your district, what the scores for each of those were. So that's not vital to doing the yo-yo, but we wanted to make that information as readily available to everybody that had anything to do with transition. So we put it right there so you couldn't miss it. You will see the list of students. This is what I'm talking about down here now. Until April 1st, that's when the yo-yo goes live. The student list will still be there, former student list, I should say. But it's your opportunity to both look at the list and make sure they're correct, and also to practice doing interviews. So you can open an interview, you can do it, you can do anything you want to it between now and April 1st, and it won't be official. It'll go into a database, but I just use the database to make sure that it's actually collecting and coding the data the way that it's supposed to. But it won't be recorded. Even if it says submitted, it'll go back to being not started on April 1st. On April 1st, then everything goes live. It's official. It'll look the same, but then your responses will start to be recorded. You can see all my fake students here. Hopefully you recognize a few of these names. I'm going to interview Marty McFly from Back to the Future. So I click on the SSID number, and that takes me to some student information. I can see what his disability was, his gender, ethnicity, how he exited high school, what school he went to, and some contact information right there, which of course I have completely made up. If I want to go to the resource manual, as I recommend that people do, I'd click right there, and it will open it as a separate page. There you can see what that looks like. You have all these great areas you can go to, but I'm just going to minimize that while I do the rest of the interview. I'm going to click Start Interview. So it gives you interviewer instructions that you can read. I'm not going to read these to you, but you can personalize it a little bit. Make sure you include all of the information. This ensures students that their information is being kept private. And it's not going to affect any of their benefits and that kind of stuff. But make it your own. Remember, you've got the script for voicemail if you get that. You can also make notes. The interviewer notes up here are really just for you and your dose, or any other interviewer that would possibly be interviewing the same student or trying to. You can make a note that you, let's say, tried Marty on 3/14, said call back Saturday after the game. And then you can look at that and you can pull that up and remember it if you want. You should make at least 3 attempts to try to get a hold of a former student. If their phone's dead, out of order, or whatever, that's the only contact information that you have. Obviously, you don't have to try a dead phone 3 times. But if it's just, if it's ringing, if you're leaving messages, we say try at least 3 times before you give up. Do the best that you can. Try as many different methods and as many different times of the day as you can. Now, if you can't contact them, okay, then you click Could Not Contact, and you can submit that. You'll go back and you'll see Marty McFly. It's been submitted, even though it was a Could Not Contact. But, let's open it back up. Let's say, that really wasn't the case. We were able to get a hold of him. He agreed to be interviewed, so I click yes. Then this becomes proceed. So then it takes me to the next question. Who was the person that was interviewed? This isn't actually a question that you ask them. This is a question for you. Was it the former student or was it a parent or guardian? Now, you'll notice if I click parent or guardian or other, it's going to ask me another question. Why was it not the former student that needed to be interviewed? And you can write in, whatever it is. Marty, had gone back in time to 1985 and wasn't available for an interview. Actually, if I see anybody write something like that, I'm going to know that they listened very diligently to this webinar and are also kind of a wiseacre. But let's say it was the former student, it's Marty himself, so I click that, and then I click next. So then the first question is, where did you live for most of last year? Here's an example of where the resource guide can come in handy. At the top of the page, you've got a link. I'm not going to click on that, but you could go to it. If they say something like, I'd really like to live on my own, but I can't seem to get away from my parents. I don't know what to do. You got any suggestions? Well, there you go. Let's say Marty is living, let's say he's living at his family home. Obviously, I'm just answering these questions for Marty. You would, of course, be asking a young person this. Let's say I'm a paranoid interviewer, and I want to save. Save after every page if you want to. It's not required, but you won't lose information that way if anything goes wrong. Click Next. Now he dropped out, so it's going to ask some questions about the dropout. What are the reasons you left high school without graduating? Well, let's see. He got beat up by Biff a lot. Maybe didn't really like school. And, here you can click Other and write something in. Time travel issues. And what might have helped you stay in school? Well, going with the time theme, maybe more flexible hours. Click Next. We have the question, from the time you left high school until now, have you ever had a paying job? Let's say he says yes, and click that. Then it'll ask a series of questions about the employment experience. So since leaving high school, have you worked for a total of 3 months or 90 days? Let's say, yeah, he has. And how many hours per week do you usually work? We used to just have more than 20 or less than 20. We wanted a little more in-depth information, so we switched to this 3-point scale: less than 20, more than 20, but less than 37.5, and more than 37.5. Using that 37.5 as kind of a gauge of full-time work. Let's say he was working full-time. Was he paid at least minimum wage in his community? Sure. Which, if any, of the following supports or accommodations did you receive at your job? This would be one that I hope people spend a little bit of time with. In the past, we haven't gotten a lot of great information out of this question, because I think that people probably are getting supported employment a little more than they say they are. So you might need to probe a little bit and say, is there someone that checks in on you from an agency? Maybe they helped you get a job, they came around, they made sure you were doing okay at your job, they maybe work with your supervisor a little bit, that kind of thing. Or do you have someone that comes with you to your job as a personal aide or assistant, or any kind of special equipment that you needed for your job? It's possible that they don't have any of those, but the numbers that we've seen in the past have been so low, they've made me think that people really didn't understand what we were asking with those questions. So please try to be as careful with that as possible. Then we ask, are you still working? Let's say that he says that he was. And we ask how interesting they think their job is. Say, Marty finds it very interesting. I'm going to save again. You'll notice, it gives me a successfully saved, takes me to the top of the page. Sorry, that's probably a little bit annoying, but it's just the only way we can do it. But go back down and click Next to move on. From the time you left high school until now, have you been in any type of school or training program? Say you did that too. So tell us about this school or training program. You can see a list there. Again, in the past, we've had an other please specify for questions like this. And 9 times out of 10, what people would do, they'd click the other and they'd specify it. And the way they specified it was something that clearly fit into one of the options that was already there. So take your time, find out really where it is that they're going to school. Maybe Marty went on to, he said, well, I'm doing this welding program. You say, oh, okay, sounds like a vocational technical school. He says, yeah, I think it was called something like that. And click that. Did he complete an entire term or semester? Let's say that he said yes. Now, I'm aware that the window for the yo-yo is a little bit off-putting for this question, because in the springtime, it starts before that semester is over. If you interview someone in the beginning of April, chances are that if that's the first semester that they're at school, they may not have had an opportunity to complete an entire term or semester. I would go ahead and ask them if it looks like they're going to complete that entire semester, and if they say yes, that's fine. Of course, if they completed it in the fall, then that's a moot point. What degree do you expect to get when you're finished with school? That's pretty straightforward, but you might need to probe a little bit just to find out exactly what they mean. A 2-year degree, okay, that would probably be an associate's. I might want to clarify that with them. Have you ever contacted the Disability Services Coordinator at your post-secondary school or training program? A lot of folks might not even know the Disability Services Coordinator exists, but it does, and you can tell them that, and you can tell them the value of doing so. Let's say that he says no, but you tell him you might not know who that person is, but you can at least say, well, if you need some support, there's someone assigned to every school to provide this kind of supports. Do you live with your family while you go to school? No. Say Marty's the kind of guy that lives on campus. If you faced any problems in your school, please let us know what they were. And here's the text box, so you would write in what they were, and you might say something like wasn't prepared for math classes. Now going on to the next page, this is our community engagement page. We ask if you have a driver's license. Well, yeah, flying DeLorean, got to have a license for that. Registered to vote. Say it probably was there. Please name the most important thing during high school that helped you in your life right now. This is one of the ones I gave some examples for probes for earlier. What was it in high school that helped? Was it, the special ed teacher, was helpful in such and such a way. Write those out, probe a little bit, see with the kind of information that you think would be necessary to relay to others in order to help them have better outcomes. Since leaving high school, have you had any contact with a counselor from OVR? So no, he didn't even know who they were. So that box disappears. If we would have said yes, then it would pop up and says, please describe the type of help you were getting. Again, be as specific as you can there. Let us know what they're really receiving. But if he says no, that box won't even be there. Going on to the next page, this is the last kind of, catch-all. Anything you want to tell us, Marty, about how life's been going since you left school, and he may, tell you all about his trips back into the past, into the future, and with Biff Tannen and all that kind of stuff. If you have interviewer comments, you can put them here. You can put anything you want. You can put feedback about the yo-yo. You can indicate to us, he answered a lot of these questions in some ways. I don't really think he understood what I was asking, even though I tried the best that I could. Those are good things for us to know. I mean, it won't change the way that we do the report if you say, I think he made all this stuff up. But it is good for us to be aware that those kind of issues are out there. In the middle, you would see information for your transition consultant right there, as well as a little thank you to the former student for doing the interview, for doing the interview. And I'll click next again. This is where you can note what information was shared with the respondent. Let's say I told Marty about his transition consultant, and let's say that I gave him some information related to higher education, because he wanted to know a little bit more about getting into a bachelor's program. Let's say, and then that's the end. So I click submit, and I go back and I see again Marty McFly. His interview has been submitted. Now it will always say either not started, open if you've saved it without submitting it, which is fine. A lot of times you'll try to contact a former student, so you'll open the interview and you'll make notes about trying to contact them, and then save it without submitting it. That's fine. You might get partway through the interview and need to go back to revisit it with a former student later. It could be open for that reason as well. But do try to make sure that you submit it when you are completely finished. So that's what everything looks like. Again, right here is I'm trying to point at it. Take the quiz right there. as a new interviewer, it'll be about a 25 question quiz. If you're on the line as a returning interviewer for some reason, it's only 5 questions then. We do require everybody to be trained every 2 years. So even if this is your first year in 2019, if you're an interviewer again, we will require you to go through an abbreviated training and to take the quiz then. That's something our advisory group recommended to us. I think it's a good idea, just to show you any new things from the instrument, to remind you of some important things. I'm going to log out. You're free to go and create accounts and pass quizzes, and make sure that your DOS does email us to let us know that they want you to be an interviewer. And we'll get you all set up. If anything doesn't work, email myself or Judy. We're pretty quick at getting back to people, and happy to help you in any way that we can. So let us know how things go, and good luck, and thanks for being part of the webinar.